Hello, my dear friends. How are you doing? Hope you are having an amazing day and not having to deal with drama. Ready for new stories I have for you today? Let's go to the first one. And don't forget to listen to the end of the story, guys, to hear my insights. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to leave a comment. For as long as I can remember, my parents always said they would pay for their daughters' weddings. When we were still kids, they set aside a wedding fund for both me and my sister. They didn't go into too much detail about the exact amounts, but the idea was clear. When the time came for either of us to get married, we would have financial support from them to help with the costs. Years later, my sister got married first. She wanted a big, extravagant wedding, and my parents made that happen. It was a beautiful day, and no expense was spared. They were thrilled to be able to give her the dream wedding she wanted, and the family came together to celebrate. I was happy for her, and I assumed that when it was my turn, my parents would support me in the same way. Fast forward a few years, and my sister's marriage fell apart. Her husband cheated on her. It wasn't just one affair. He had been unfaithful multiple times. When she finally confronted him, it turned into a nightmare. Not only was he unrepentant, but he also began playing hardball in the divorce. My sister had been a stay-at-home mother since the birth of their first child, a choice she and her husband made together. She never worked a day in her life, so she was completely dependent on him financially. Now that the marriage was ending, he was trying to take everything. He wanted full custody of their children, he wanted the house, and he was fighting her on every financial asset they had. As you can imagine, my sister was devastated. She didn't know how to handle such a nasty divorce, and she desperately needed help both emotionally and financially. My parents were incredibly worried about her and the grandchildren. They stepped in immediately, telling her they would do whatever it took to support her. They said she needed the best lawyer she could get, someone who could fight back against her husband's aggressive tactics. I didn't blame them for wanting to help. It was a horrible situation, and I felt for her. At the same time, I was planning my own wedding. My fiancé and I had been together for years, and we were finally ready to tie the knot. I was in my late 30s, and we had been trying to start a family naturally without success. Where we live, in order to begin the IVF process, we needed to be married. The clock was ticking, and I knew that waiting even another year could further reduce our chances. So our wedding wasn't just about having a ceremony. It was about starting a family we had been dreaming of. Our timeline wasn't just important, it felt urgent. We had been saving up for the wedding ourselves, but we were also relying on the contribution my parents had promised. We weren't planning anything extravagant, just a simple, intimate wedding. But even a modest event can get expensive. When we started putting down deposits for the venue and other vendors, I felt secure knowing that my parents' help would allow us to have the wedding we'd been dreaming of. Then, one evening, my parents sat me down and told me they needed to talk about the wedding fund. They explained that my sister's divorce was becoming increasingly messy and that her husband's lawyer was relentless. They said my sister's lawyer wasn't good enough to handle the case and that she needed someone more experienced and more aggressive. They told me that the only way to afford this top-tier attorney was to use the money from my wedding fund. I was stunned. I asked if they were serious, and they said they were. They told me they were sorry, but my sister's need was more urgent. They said that because my sister was a stay-at-home mom who had never worked, she was in a much more vulnerable position than I was. They argued that my wedding could be postponed, but her legal battle couldn't wait. "You'll still have your wedding eventually," my mom said. "But if we don't act now, your sister could lose everything." Then they asked me to postpone my wedding indefinitely. They said it wasn't the right time for a wedding because the family was going through so much turmoil. They said my sister was in a fragile emotional state and that it would be unfair to have a celebration while she was dealing with so much pain. "You have to understand," my dad said. "This is about family. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for each other." I didn't know what to say. I felt torn between sympathy for my sister and frustration with her and my parents. I understood that her situation was dire, but I also couldn't believe they were asking me to put my life on hold. I was already feeling the weight of time. Every month that went by without starting our family made me more anxious. Delaying our wedding would mean delaying the start of our IVF treatments, and we couldn't afford to wait indefinitely. Also, why is it my fault that my sister chose not to work and rely on her husband financially? I told my parents I needed time to think about it. That night, I talked it over with my fiancé. He was supportive, but also upset. He pointed out that we'd been saving and planning carefully, and that my parents had promised this help for years. He asked if I thought it was fair to sacrifice our wedding plans for my sister's divorce. I had to admit that I didn't. I felt terrible for my sister, but I didn't think it was right to take away something that had been promised to me, especially when my own future as a mother was at stake. After a long discussion, we decided we wouldn't postpone the wedding. When I told my parents, they were furious. They said I was being selfish and insensitive. They accused me of not caring about my sister's struggles. "You're putting your own happiness above your family," my mom said. "What kind of message does that send?" My sister also called me to say she couldn't believe I wasn't postponing. She said that I was being heartless, that I should stand by her during her darkest time. It felt like my entire family had turned against me. Despite their anger, my fiancé and I moved forward. We cut back on expenses, used more of our own savings, and managed to have the wedding on our original date. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't exactly the wedding we'd envisioned, but we were determined to get married and start our IVF journey. On the day of the wedding, neither my parents nor my sister came. They had all made it clear that they wouldn't attend if we didn't postpone. It hurt to have them absent, but we tried to focus on the people who did show up: friends, other family members, and loved ones who were happy to celebrate with us. The day itself was beautiful, but there was an underlying sadness knowing that my own family chose not to be there. After the wedding, everything got only worse. My parents said they couldn't believe I went ahead with the wedding, that I had embarrassed them, that I'd ruined their reputation with the extended family. They said people would think I was cold-hearted for not waiting until my sister's divorce was resolved. My sister chimed in again, saying that I only cared about myself and that I didn't understand what she was going through. I was accused of tearing the family apart simply because I didn't put my life on hold indefinitely. In truth, I did care. I never wanted to hurt my sister, and I wish there was a way to help her without sacrificing my own wedding and delaying our chance at starting a family. But my parents and sister didn't see it that way. They made it clear that they thought I'd chosen my wedding over my family, and that was something they couldn't forgive. Now, months later, my relationship with my parents and sister is still strained. I sometimes wonder if I could have handled things differently, but I also feel like I was put in an impossible position. I tried to compromise, I tried to be understanding, but in the end, I had to make a choice. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for going ahead with my wedding? I don't think OP is an a-hole here. It sounds like OP's parents expected OP to put her entire life on hold just because OP's sister was going through a difficult time. It's one thing to be supportive, but it's another to have your own needs and plans completely sidelined. OP had a very good reason for wanting to move forward. She's trying to start a family, and waiting too long could seriously impact her chances. On top of that, they promised OP that money for years, and it's not fair for them to suddenly take it away and then demand that OP just accepts it. OP handled it as well as she could, and the fact that they chose not to come to OP's wedding only shows how one-sided their expectations were. OP is not the one who ruined the family relationship. They did that by dismissing OP's needs and then blaming OP when she stood up for herself. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Not the a-hole. It's heartbreaking that your parents refused to understand how important your wedding and your timing was to you. While it's unfortunate that your sister is dealing with a messy divorce, that doesn't mean you should have to sacrifice your own life and future for her. Your parents promised you that wedding fund, and they didn't keep their promise. They expected you to give up something extremely meaningful, and when you decided to move forward without them, they chose to make you out to be the bad guy. You clearly cared about your sister and her situation, but no one seemed to care about yours. You aren't in the wrong here. You made the best decision you could under very unfair circumstances. Not the a-hole. I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been to have your parents ask you to delay your wedding, something you'd been planning and saving for because of your sister's divorce. They made a promise that you relied on, and then they not only broke it, but also tried to guilt you into postponing something so important to you. It's not like you weren't aware of what your sister was going through. You clearly understood her pain, but you had your own challenges to face, including a time-sensitive need to move forward, so you could start a family. It's not selfish to prioritize your own life and your future. Your parents and sister are acting like their struggles are the only ones that matter, and that's not fair. You did what you had to do, and I think you made the right call. Not the a-hole. It's really unfair that your family couldn't see that you had a legitimate, urgent reason to move forward with your wedding. You have a time-sensitive need to start your family, and it's not reasonable for them to expect you to put your plans on hold indefinitely. Your sister's situation is unfortunate, but that doesn't mean everything in your life has to stop. Your parents made a promise to help with your wedding, and when they decided to go back on that, you had every right to move forward without them. The fact that they didn't show up and are now blaming you just goes to show that they're unwilling to take responsibility for their own choices. You weren't selfish. You were just looking out for your own future when no one else was. My, female 34, sister got married last week. When she got engaged 6 months ago, she told me she wanted me to be her bridesmaid. I agreed. How could I not? The other bridesmaids were all pretty rich. Sis and groom weren't planning on holding back on the wedding because they had a pretty big budget. The groom's from a wealthy family. There wasn't a problem until 3 months before the wedding when she and her friends, the other bridesmaids, were picking out dresses. The dresses cost $300 each and were so pretty, oh my God. They were pastel pink with yellow embroidered roses on them, handmade. I, female 21, am a college student and I'm broke. I couldn't afford a dress that cost that much, especially since I was only going to wear it once. I told my sister immediately, so she said she'd pay $150 and I could pay the rest myself. She sent me the money, and since there was still 3 months before the wedding, she said I had to salvage something. Now, $150? That's like 2 weeks' worth of groceries. I decided to keep the money she'd given me to myself because I sure as hell wasn't going to spend another $150 on some dress. My sis never asked me about the dress again until a week before the wedding. I told her I hadn't bought it yet and spent it on things I actually needed. She was pissed, saying there wasn't enough time to order a new dress. She told me I couldn't be a bridesmaid without it. I didn't show up to the wedding, for obvious reasons. She called me after, asking me where I was and calling me an a-hole and a liar. What did I do that was remotely a-hole-ish? I'm broke. There's no way I could afford such an expensive dress. You're the a-hole. Your sister gave you money for the dress. You kept it and used it on other things. Then you didn't tell her you did that, or that you changed your mind about being a bridesmaid, and then just let her find out what you did a week before. I don't think this is real, but if it is, wow, you are definitely the a-hole. You're the a-hole. She sent you that money for a dress, not for you to spend, even on needs. And I'm confused. Why did you not go as a guest? Were you afraid she would ask for her money back? You should have said you can't even afford $150, and you are sorry you cannot be in the wedding. You're the a-hole. You stole your sister's money. When someone gives you money, and it's not a gift, which this wasn't, and you spend it on anything else other than what it was specified for, it's theft, which makes you a thief. Your sister is justifiably angry. I admit that my financial struggles were no one's fault but my own, particularly blowing through the thousands I could have saved in the Army. And I acknowledge that. I'm not blaming her or anyone else for my past struggles. Those are my own fault. With that disclaimer out of the way, I didn't have any money, and I was on the verge of getting evicted years back. I knew my older sister lived a nice life, so I figured she'd help me out since she no doubt had the money. I was wrong. She said, "Your problems are your own to solve. I can't bail you out every time you're in trouble. I wish I could help, but this one is up to you." I took that pretty hard, and sure enough, I was out of work and out of a home, while she was living the high life. I've turned my life around and am in a much better place. She has hit a rough patch and hasn't been where she was for years. Her career, which started off well, was thrown off after she got pregnant and stayed home with them, even though her husband presumably didn't make as much. But I honestly don't know all the details, just that she was stressed out at work and wanted it. Her oldest son was in some sort of car accident and had to stay in the hospital and get some sort of treatment, but they never said what was wrong with him, just that they were left with a huge medical bill, $168K. But when they asked me if I could help, I'm sure I could. I said that that was a personal problem that she'd have to solve on her own. And now some of my family have literally left me text messages talking about how it's petty to hold on to her not paying my rent. Well, they're right. She didn't have to pay my rent, and I don't have to pay her son's medical bills. You're the a-hole. Before I say anything else, it's not because you aren't going to help pay. I don't actually care about that aspect. Accepting responsibility for blowing through all that cash would mean dropping the resentment towards your sister. The fact that you're still harping on that exact phrasing is a pretty clear indicator you still think you were entitled to have your rent paid. And if she had paid it, I'd be willing to bet you wouldn't have gotten your act together, because then the situation would have been subsidized. You have more work to do there. You're drawing the comparison between you blowing your savings on stuff you didn't need and a life-saving medical bill is both idiotic and petty. Those two issues are not remotely the same as far as financial responsibility goes, and you know it, so don't play dumb. She asked if you could help. You came up to her expecting her to cover your rent. Once again, these are not parallel situations. You don't have to pay anything. You also don't have to speak to your sister like a vindictive a-hole out for revenge. But here you are, choosing to behave like that. You're the a-hole. You left out of your post that you lost your rent money because you intentionally spent it on lottery tickets. It paints a very different light to your sister saying that she wasn't going to give you more money. Leaving out such important details from the post to justify your choice to be petty, which, to be clear, you have every right to do, is an a-hole move. Not the a-hole. It doesn't matter what you blew your money on, and it doesn't seem that you are comparing your financial issues to hers. Honestly, it doesn't matter what caused either of you to have financial difficulty. Your sister was right. She did not have to help you. You are right. You do not have to help her. I'm currently on a year break from work due to burnout. We've had to cut some costs to make it workable on his income alone. Now, I hate cleaning, and I'm not good at it. My fiancé has a totally different level of clean from me. Prior to my work gap, we hired a cleaner because housework caused arguments. We both paid towards the service, $230 a week. We have one joint account for household costs, and then our own separate accounts. Well, 5 months ago, the cleaning service we used increased their prices, and it went to $400 a week. My fiancé said he couldn't afford that, and we had 3 options. Once a month, no cleaner at all, or try to find someone online. I really like the company we use and don't want to find someone else. He wanted to do no cleaner at all for a few months to save up money in our joint account that our household expenses come out of, and then hire a cleaner again. His reasoning for not being able to afford it is that it'd reduce the amount of money he has each month to put into his personal account, and he also gives me a bit each month, so I don't deplete all of my savings while I'm on break. The cleaner is a necessary household expense, and if that means he has less fun money to divide between us, then that's what has to happen. He said I could always get a part-time job to cover half of the new price, and I told him no. I feel like he'd be going back on our agreement to let me take a break, and he'd cover all our expenses while I'm recovering from burnout. Last week, he tells me he's going on a 3-day trip with his brother and their friend. I asked him if his brother is paying his way, and he said no. He was paying his share. I told him he couldn't go then. If he couldn't afford all our expenses, then he couldn't afford to go on a vacation. My fiancé got upset and said he could do with his money what he wanted because he was paying out of his own pocket, and then threw it in my face that I go to the spa, get my nails done, or have lunch with my friends once a week. I told him that's different because it's a one-time expense each week and not 3 days straight of spending money and not nearly as expensive. He went to work. I went on his computer, found the reservation for the cabin, and canceled it. After that, I hired a cleaner back on to be weekly coming from our joint account. The cost of that 3-day trip wasn't much more than the company's weekly rate, and we need a cleaner. My fiancé still doesn't see it that way. When he found out I canceled, he called me upset and said he wasn't coming home except to grab some stuff. He wouldn't talk to me, and I find that ridiculous because he needs to understand where I'm coming from. He's been with his brother for the last 4 days, and he says he isn't ready to talk about this until he calms down and clears his head. I think he's just overreacting and being selfish since he isn't thinking about our needs first. Am I the a-hole? Edit. I'm an awful person, I get it. No need for name-calling. I was wrong to ask him to reduce our fun money and not talk about the trip first. Yes, I go to a spa weekly. It's something I've been doing practically every week since I was a teen with my mom and aunt. You're the a-hole. Huge a-hole. I understand being burnt out, but a household cleaner is not a necessary expense. You had no right to cancel his trip. You're the a-hole. You aren't working, you don't clean, and you spend money on spas, lunches, nails, hair, etc. and can't give your fiancé 3 days with his money? And you canceled his trip behind his back? This isn't a partnership. You are using him. You have had a year-long break with no adult responsibilities. You are making no contributions to the household, but feel you have the right to cancel his plans and also spend his money on a house cleaner. Do him a favor and end the relationship and move out. Jesus, yes, you're the a-hole. He wants a 3-day break while you get a year. Think of how often you go get your nails done and to the spa and whatever other little expenses you deserve as a treat. Combine that and see if his 3-day cabin adventure is still absolutely ridiculous enough for you to cancel behind his back. My husband, stepson, 14 male, and I all have Swiss citizenship. My daughter does not. In late 2019, several job opportunities came up for me, and a lot of business opportunities came up for my husband in Switzerland. As such, I made the executive decision to take a job in Switzerland, and my husband moved his business operations there as well. However, we felt my daughter, 15, would do better finishing her schooling in America, so we enrolled her in a boarding school. When the virus hit, there were some worries regarding whether or not Switzerland would close their borders anytime soon. My daughter was at boarding school but begged me to come back to the U.S. However, I realized that if I came back, I could possibly miss out on work or business opportunities if I'm gone for too long. I also did not want to leave my husband when he was stressed out about business. He travels within the country a lot, and my stepson went to a local school and was home often. So I wanted to make sure he wasn't lonely and had a close person to talk to, which my daughter had at her boarding school. My daughter ended up having a mental breakdown and ended up in the school's medical facility because she didn't eat for 4 days at the end of summer. She has barely communicated with me since, but this week we started Zoom therapy. However, all she did during our first session was blame me for not coming home. I got angry and defended my actions, saying it was selfish of her to expect me to make a decision that would essentially leave the question of my career and marriage up in the air. And I told her she essentially wanted me to abandon a 14-year-old boy with a nanny while his father was traveling for work when she had teachers and students to socialize with where she was. My daughter got mad and told me she wanted to end the Zoom now. Am I the a-hole? You're the a-hole. You are willing to abandon your daughter, but you don't want to leave your son with a nanny. You pretty much excluded her from the family and then chose everyone else over her when she was crying out for help just before a mental breakdown. Too bad there are no boarding schools in Switzerland or ways to get your daughter residency. Oh well. You're the a-hole. Hopefully you can maintain your relationship with your stepson so that you have one child who wants you in their life. You're the a-hole. Your husband is an adult who can take care of himself. Your stepson is 14 and capable of doing some things for himself with some supervision. You left your daughter alone in another country in the middle of a virus. You are to blame, and it is unlikely you will ever be able to rebuild the relationship between you and your daughter. Even before the virus, you left her alone at a boarding school while you immigrated to an entirely new continent. You abandoned her for theoretically 3+ years. I genuinely hope she can get past this and grow to be a good and healthy person, despite your so-called parenting. My daughter, 13, and stepson, 11, have not gotten along since my daughter moved in. She had previously lived with her mother, but I got default custody after her mother turned one of her 24-hour disappearing acts into a never-coming-back one. My daughter and stepson go to the same middle school, and were both running for student council vice president. There was tension in the house, and my wife told my stepson that if he won, we would go out to celebrate. My daughter asked if this applied to her as well, since he wasn't her only competitor, and my wife said, of course. The campaign got pretty stressful for the both of them. Then the votes come in, and my daughter wins by 4 votes. However, because somehow the one person who ran for treasurer this year dropped out because of grades, my stepson was offered that position. He saw it as a really pitiful consolation prize and was angry that he had to take orders from my daughter. I felt very bad for my stepson, and he and his mother, who is also very type A, was very upset, even though of course my wife congratulated my daughter. My stepson refused to be comforted by the fact that older kids get more easily elected because they know more people, and his mother even offered to take him to her law office and give him some responsibilities, saying that was better experience than student council would ever be. My stepson then said, "Please tell me you're not trying to rub it in my face by taking us to dinner now." My wife also looks really reluctant to go to dinner. I finally tell my daughter that we weren't going to be going to dinner because her stepbrother was very upset by the turn of events, and we need to take his feelings into consideration, and that I was impolite to gloat. That all happened Friday. My daughter ended up crying, and even now, Sunday night, she still is mad at all of us. Am I the a-hole? You're the a-hole. Massive, massive, massive you're the a-hole. Your daughter worked her butt off to win the spot, and you let her whiny, jealous, sore loser stepbrother ruin the celebration for her accomplishment. You showed your daughter that her hard work and accomplishments means nothing to you, and showed your stepson that throwing a fit will get him whatever the duck he wants, no matter who it hurts. Terrible parenting. Absolute garbage. You have one, and only one, chance to fix this. You tell your daughter you ducked up majorly, and you are incredibly sorry, and will try your best to not do things like that again, and that she now gets 2 dinners out, one to celebrate, and one as an apology. Then sit your wife and stepson down. Tell them both that every accomplishment deserves to be celebrated, and that all 3 of you owe your daughter an apology, and you will be taking her out for the 2 dinners. If they choose to apologize, they can go with you. If they refuse to apologize, they can keep their sore loser butts at home. Then get in family therapy ducking ASAP. You're the a-hole, so your child, the same one abandoned by her mother, gets her celebration canceled so her father can console his stepson, someone who has a mother to fill that role. Huge, 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 huge a-hole. One of the 2 kids that lives in your house was going to win, and one was going to lose. Did you not foresee there might be some hard feelings? You promised both you'd celebrate whoever won, and now that the kid that lost is pitching a fit, you're rewarding that poor sportsmanship by not celebrating the other kid's win like you promised. Good job reinforcing bad behavior, Dad. Nothing you describe indicates one kid was gloating, just that one kid won, and expected you to celebrate that like you promised. This was a great opportunity to work on sportsmanship and how you handle winning and losing. Instead, you're rewarding bad behavior and teaching the opposite of what you want your kids to learn. You're the a-hole.